During a tense hearing on Oahu on February 12th, testifiers expressed nearly universal opposition to SB 3090, a bill that proposes to overturn the current University of Hawaii-based management of Mauna Kea, replacing it with a new Mauna Kea Management Authority. Hilo Senator Kai Kahele, who chairs the Higher Education Committee, was asking tough questions.
From the University of Hawaii, I guess it would be Greg.
With oral arguments before the Hawaii State Supreme Court concerning the 30-meter telescope sublease scheduled for March 15th, Kahele dove into the issue with UH administrators and Department of Land and Natural Resources Land Division officials.
This goes to the ground rent piece. I'm assuming that the University of Hawaii, or OMKM, negotiated the land rent that was to be charged to the TMT telescope?
That's correct.
So it's my understanding in years 1 through 3, $300,000 would be paid by TMT, and that they've paid that in a few years. Are they still paying that? $300,000 a year?
I don't believe so.
Okay, and then if I'm not mistaken, by year 11, or when the telescope would get first light, they would be paying a little over $1 million a year in ground rent.
That was where it was going to escalate to, correct.
How do we determine those numbers?
Excuse me, I think they conducted, they engaged the services of Hallstrom, and it was based on, as I understand it, a percentage of operating or management costs based on size of the facility or the footprint of the lease.
So HRS 17117 refers to, of course, the use of public lands and the fair market value for those lands, that the determining price should be negotiated or at least be determined by a appraiser, by the land division, or an independent appraiser. Did OMKM contract professional services for an independent appraiser to do a ground rent analysis of the 13 North Plateau where TMT would be sited?
I'm not sure who contracted with Hallstrom, but Hallstrom was contracted, yes, and I believe that was the method that they came up with.
But was Hallstrom representing the University of Hawaii to come up with that number?
I'm not sure who actually engaged them.
So I'm trying to get to, did we do an independent appraisal? Did the Office of Mauna Kea Management, in its negotiations with TIO for their sublease, in determining fair market ground rent per 17117, did we comply with that statute? Did the University of Hawaii comply with that?
I don't know the answer to that.
Now, as far as the UH to TMT, again, we weren't involved. I don't know exact process that they followed. If the question is, are they required to follow 17117? I don't think so, but that's more of a legal question for the lawyers on both sides.
Are the Mauna Kea lands public trust lands, as defined by HRS 171? Yes. So why wouldn't they have to comply with 17117, which is in determining ground rent, a fair market value analysis done by an independent appraiser? Why wouldn't they have to follow that? Because of the exception?
Because it's a government entity lease. It's basically a government entity is the University of Hawaii. Now, what they charge for the TMT and whether they should be charging under 17117, like I said, I don't think they have to. But again, it may be a legal question that I haven't really studied. Yeah.
Thank you.
So, first of all, TIO was the one who contracted with Hallstrom to do the market lease analysis. I don't recall all the details, but from what I do recall, it was that there are no comparables that they could find for something for the Mauna Kea situation, and that there were no, because the entities on the summit of Mauna Kea are not for-profit institutions, whereas most lease rents are determined in large part based on a revenue stream for profit making, so there were none. And so the best that they could do was to look at lease rents that were paid in other parts of the Big Island. And the lease rent per square, I can't remember if it's per square foot or per acreage, far exceeded the highest rents that were being paid on the Big Island, and particularly for resort areas.
So TIO contracted a professional appraiser to do an appraisal, and they came up with those numbers.
Right.
Did we verify those numbers? Did the university, OMKM, verify those numbers to make sure that that was an appropriate amount that we should be receiving from TIO in ground rent?
The university did not do its own independent
Should
analysis.
we have? How do you know we're getting the appropriate revenue from the land if we don't do our own appraisal?
I suppose the university could have, but Hallstrom is a reputed individual who does these kinds of analyses.
How do we intend to negotiate the ground rents for the other telescopes?
The ground rent for TMT was based on what we felt was a fair use of what it would cost to manage the mountain, and we looked at the square footage of all the telescopes that currently, at that time, occupied the summit of Mauna Kea, and we came up with a figure of approximately $95,000 per acre.
I don't disagree with you that it's difficult to find comparable sales on Mauna Kea, which is why I would think you would utilize one factor on Mauna Kea to determine ground rent, which would be astronomical viewing time. Was that in any consideration for the ground rent? How much that time is worth to foreign countries or universities that utilize the time on the telescope?
Well, for generally when you're looking at rent, we normally look, I think it's usually looked at if you're making some monies or profits, and that is usually taken into account. But the observatories are not revenue-generating entities. They are research facilities which get grants primarily from government agencies to run their operations.
So TIO, through their appraiser, gave us numbers, and we accepted those numbers.
Those are numbers that were in his study, and those were presented to the Board of Land and Natural Resources.
Do we plan to use those numbers for future negotiations of other telescopes?
Well, the purpose for that analysis was to look at whether or not the sublease rents that were being paid, that was going to be paid by TIO, if it was reasonable in terms of what people considered to be fair market rent. And so that was the purpose of doing that analysis.
My concern is we aren't getting enough ground rent that we should. I mean, an independent appraisal would determine how much ground rent potentially could be received. And if that amount is more than what is currently determined, that's more money for OHA, it's more money for the state, it's more money for DLNR, it's more money for OMKM. It's more money that can be used for operational resources.
Yes. And so, you know, going forward, and we all understand this, university understands this, all the telescopes who plan to stay beyond 2033 understand this, and that the dollar a year model, which was used actually at that time when astronomy was first being considered for Mauna Kea, the dollar a year is a figure that is needed to make a contract legal. You have to have some kind of a figure.
This was not a money-making proposition for UH. That the thing that UH was getting out of it was the shared telescope time. Now, is that not true?
That is largely true.
Largely
yes.
True. Okay,
well,
that's different.
It's true. Well, the director says it's entirely true, but I'd say in the example of the TMT, if the university can actually start to garner some.
It's true of the telescopes that are up there now.
Yes, true.
Okay, so it's a different pair. So does that mean if TMT is built that the astronomy institute does not get shared time, they'll have to pay like everybody else?
We'll have a share of time. It will be smaller than what we have on other telescopes.
How much smaller?
7.5%.
I'm sorry, how much?
7.5%.
7.5. So for $1 million ground lease, you lose 7.5%, if it happens.
If you do the math that way, you would look at the ground lease and also at a community benefits package, which includes the Think Fund and a workforce development plan.
Okay, but anyway, it's not the same. It's not the same model as what we've been doing to this point. All right, I'm glad to know that, but it would have been nice to know when I asked the question the first time.